with that, it is my honor to introduce Zev Yaroslavsky, who's going to be talking about his life from Boyle Heights to the halls of power in Los Angeles. He was born and raised in Los Angeles from Russian-Ukrainian parents. He earned a Bachelor of Arts in History and Economics, and then a Master of Arts in History, specializing in the British Empire, all from UCLA. And afterwards, he taught Hebrew in temples in Pasadena and Bel Air. And in a Los Angeles political career spanning 4 decades, he was LA City Council, LA County Board of Supervisors. He played a central role in shaping America's largest metropolitan area: healthcare, transportation, fiscal policy, civil liberties, arts, culture, and we are just so glad, Zev, for you to join us today. If we were in person, Zev actually was going to bring some copies of his new book, which he was willing to sign. So we're going to have to sign virtually here. Oh, there it is.
Here it is.
And Zev, thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll again recommend that everybody put your Zoom on speaker view and mute. Thank you. Zev, it's all yours.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you all for attending this morning. I appreciate the rescheduling, because I live in the Fairfax area, and to come to Encino in this storm would have been an existential threat to my car's engine, let alone the driver. So I think this is going to work out much better. First of all, I'm honored to have been asked to spend an hour with you, a little less than an hour. I'm a big fan of Valley Beth Shalom, and I've spent a lot of time there, and some of your members are some of my closest friends, and your rabbi, Eddie Feinstein, is one of the greats in the rabbinate in this country. So I'm honored to be here. My talk today is going to be a little bit of policy, but nested in my memoir. I'm going to use my memoir as kind of the framework of what I wanted to talk about. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about everything in the memoir. I do encourage you to get it. You can get it on Amazon. It's called Zev's Los Angeles. If you just type that in, you'll be able to get it. I was going to have my bookstore at the temple this morning if we hadn't had the storm, and it would have been available. But I make no money on this, by the way. I want to make that clear. It all goes it'll all end up in the hands of my nonprofit, which will end up at UCLA. So whereas I've been teaching since 2015. So let me tell you why I wrote the book in the first place. As Joel said, I'm a history major. I have a master's in history. I'm trained to do 2 things in life. One is to run. I used to run track at Fairfax High School. I wasn't very good, but it was good training. And the other thing I was trained to do was to be a historian. I had some great professors who taught me about the discipline and the ethics of history. And I'm a believer that people who have a life, whether it's in politics or in the rabbinate or driving a garbage truck, have an obligation, if they have something to say, if only to their descendants, to write their story. One of the great gifts that my parents left me was the book they compiled about my maternal grandfather, who's the subject of the first chapter of the book. His name was Shimon Soloveitchik. He's a Soloveitchik, distantly related, I'm sure, to the rabbinical family, but all the Soloveitchiks are related. And my grandfather was a very interesting guy. He was one of the original labor Zionists in the late 19th century. He was part of that generation that brought the Hebrew language into functionality. Up until then, Hebrew was a biblical, a language of scripture. In the late 19th century, this group of idealists resurrected the conversational Hebrew and the literary Hebrew, Ivrit Chaya, as they say, living language. And he was part of that generation. That's what he did in Ukraine. He had a cheder in Poltava, one of the bigger cities in Ukraine. And then in 1923, he and my grandmother, and my mother, who was then 13 years old, came to the United States. And they ended up in New York, but later in the 30s, they came to Los Angeles because my grandfather had respiratory issues and other health issues, and the doctor recommended they go to a place with clean, dry air. And they picked Los Angeles, and my sister and I were born here and raised in Boyle Heights. And when I was 8, my sister is older than me, as she resents my always saying that, but she's 8 years older than me and lives in Israel, made Aliyah in the early 60s. And we moved from Boyle Heights to the Fairfax area, and I've lived within 8 blocks of the house my dad and mom bought on Martell Avenue ever since. I still live within walking distance of their home. This is my neighborhood. I went to Fairfax High School. I went to UCLA. And I got involved in the issue of Soviet Jewry when I was a college student, actually, even as a high school student. And it started when I had my bar mitzvah in 1961. And we got a slew of telegrams. My parents were very active labor Zionists. They had friends in Israel. They had friends in New York and colleagues and people they worked with. And we were flooded with telegrams. Mazel tov on your bar mitzvah, Mazel tov on your bar mitzvah day, congratulations on your bar mitzvah. Everything was bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah. We got a telegram from my aunts, my dad's sisters, who lived in Kharkiv. Now it's called Kharkiv in Ukraine. And the telegram said, congratulations on your 13th birthday. And so I asked my dad, every other telegram is Mazel Tov on your bar mitzvah. What's with happy birthday? And he explained to me at the age of 13 that if they had said bar mitzvah, if they had put bar mitzvah in the telegram, first of all, it might not have even gotten sent. And secondly, there might have been consequences for them, a visit from the KGB or God knows what. And so it's just safer and more prudent just to say happy birthday. And that got my attention as a young kid. And in the era of the 60s, which was, civil rights and the anti-war movement, when I got to college, it was social activism was the order of the day. I decided to invest my time in the cause of Soviet Jewry. And Janice Resnick and Janice and Ben, who are members of your temple and very close friends of mine going back to college days. Janice herself was very active in the Soviet Jewry movement. We decided we were going to take on the other world superpower and try to free Soviet Jews. We were young, we were naive, we had no notion that what we were doing was going to fail. We believed we could actually bring the Soviets to open the gates. If I had started that when I was 65, I would have said I'm going to spend my time on something more solvable, like the traffic in Los Angeles. But at the time, we were all idealists, and boy, were we surprised in 1989 when the wall came down, and free immigration, for all intents and purposes, became the order of the day. And I was really seasoned in that social activism. That's what my parents taught me and my sister to do, to be involved in issues that were bigger than ourselves. This goes back to my grandparents, and especially my maternal grandfather, Soloveitchik. You imagine in the 1890s to be a 20-year-old thinking that you could reclaim the Jewish state in Palestine, and have this notion that you could actually recreate the Jewish homeland, which we had been in the diaspora for almost 2,000 years at that point. I've always been fascinated by my grandfather, and I've said on many occasions, I say it in the book, that if there's one person I would have liked to have met, people always ask you, if there's one person in world history you'd like to have met, who would it be? Churchill, Aristotle, Plato. For me, it would have been my maternal grandfather, because unfortunately, he didn't live to see Israel's independence declared, but he saw it coming, and he was able to vicariously live through my mother and my father's trips to Palestine, what was then Palestine, in the early 30s, when they made their first trip there. And my letters that my grandfather wrote to my mother about this were love letters of Israel and of Zionism. And so he was really, even though he died 8 years before I was born, he's had a profound influence on my life. And I'd like to think that between him and my parents, my dad was the founder of the Hebrew Teachers Union here in L.A. In the 1940s. Both of my parents were Hebrew teachers and active labor Zionists. So we came from a household where the most valuable possession we had were books, and including a machzor that goes back to 1801, that was handed down in the Soloveitchik family from generation to generation, and I arm wrestled my sister for it, telling her that the humidity in Haifa would destroy the book. Let me take it to L.A. where we have clean, dry air. and I've got it. It's right here on my shelf, and it's so I give you that sense of who, why I am who I am. We're all the products of our parents, of our ancestors. And as I wrote this book, and the book, it took me 7.5 years to finish. I started it in 2016. In the middle of it, my wife passed away, so I put the pen down for a while, and then finished it. It gave me an opportunity to reflect on who I was, what I was, how I became what I was. It wasn't an accident. It was really I was really guided by my parents and my grandparents. They taught me and my sister to do things, to be selfless and to do things that were bigger than ourselves. And my sister did the ultimate thing. She made Aliyah in 1961, I believe is the year. And with the exception of some academic, years off, that sabbaticals that she and her husband had, they've lived in Israel since 1961. It's where she met her husband, and she lives in Haifa to this day. Now, I came into, I tell you this because when I was writing the book, and I had a manuscript, I shared it with a friend of mine, longtime friend who passed away a couple of years ago, Tim Rutten, who used to be a columnist for the L.A. Times, and I knew him when I was in college. And I asked him to look at the manuscript, and he said he loved it. It's great. He says, but the first third of your book is about your pre-public service days and about your family and all that. If you get a publisher, they're going to ask you to cut it, either to cut it down or to eliminate it, because it's not of any interest to anybody. And I said, I don't think that's true. And he said he didn't think it was true either. He says, when they ask you to cut it, don't, because that tells the reader who you are and why you are who you are. As a practical matter, now that the book's been out for now 7-8 months, the single most often heard comment I get about the book is, we love the first part of the book. We didn't know about your background. We didn't know about your grandfather. We didn't know about your youth and all, and it does foreshadow how I became who I was. As a public servant, when I ran for office, it was a lark. I was involved in politics. I never had any ambition, I should say, to run for office. I would have been happy, given my Soviet Jewry activities, lobbying for the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which some of you will remember was the bill that tied most favored nation status for the Soviet Union to free emigration of Jews. It was my first taste of real politics, lobbying congressmen and senators, going to Washington. I got the bug, and if there was one job I would have wanted, it would have been to be a staff person up on Capitol Hill. I just loved the action. There was another job I wanted, which was Vin Scully's job broadcasting for the Dodgers, but it's a good thing I didn't wait around for him to retire. But yeah, I was involved in the McGovern for President campaign in 1972 against Nixon. I was the Jewish coordinator for California as a young man, a young 22-year-old, 23-year-old, whatever I was, in 1972, and he got killed in California, but I delivered the Jewish vote for him. I like to joke with my friends. And after that, Ed Edelman, who some of you will remember was a councilman and later a member of the Board of Supervisors, was running for the Board of Supervisors in 1974. And some of my friends from the Soviet Jewry movement and from the McGovern campaign said, why don't you think about running for his seat? Because he's going to win the supervisor seat. It'll open up the city council seat. And I didn't really warm up to the idea very quickly, and talked to my wife about it, to Barbara, and she said, well, if you're going to do it now. We have no kids. We have enough money saved up. You can take a leave of absence from your job, which was running the Council for Soviet Jews, and go for it. And so I did warm up to the idea finally, and it was a long shot. Nobody expected me to win. I didn't expect to win, but through a series of lucky occurrences and hard work, walking door to door for 6 solid months, even in rain like we're having today. In fact, the best time to walk if you're a politician is on a day like today, because first of all, everybody's home. And number two, they'll never forget you came to the door when it was pouring rain. And I did that rain or shine from January 1 to May 27th of 1975. And by the time I got into close to the election, I could sense that there was a momentum building for my campaign. In the primary, I beat Roz Wyman by 359 votes. I came in second. And the top two vote getters in that race then run as in the runoff. And my opponent in the runoff was Fran Savage, who became a friend after the election, and she just passed away. Fran Savage was one of Tom Bradley's top aides, and the Bradley machine had backed her. But I prevailed, and it was the luck of timing. It was right after Watergate. People had an anti-establishment attitude, and I was the personification of anti-establishment. I had, I think, 2 suits to my name, which I bought for the campaign. My hair was long, my was unkempt. I didn't have to say I was anti-establishment. I looked it, and I was. My car got smashed up in an accident during the campaign. I kept driving it. Ended up selling it to Ben and Janice Resnick after I got elected. They needed a car. They were in law school, so that's how far back we go. And my public service career is really the subject of 2/3 of the book. And what I tried to do in the book is not make this a vanity project. I take shots at myself. I mean, I talk about the good things that I did, but I also talk about the mistakes that we made and that the system made. One of them is homelessness. We have a homeless problem today because we ignored it for far too long, and now we're trying to catch up on lost time, and it's a big problem. Martin Luther King Hospital, which we had to shut down because we didn't have the guts to stand up to the unions, to stand up to community stakeholders who didn't care about the quality of the care as much as they cared about keeping the institution open and not having the Board of Supervisors and the Director of Health Services of the county actually hold people accountable for the work they were doing. Those were some of the mistakes we made, but there were a lot of great achievements, and I wanted to put it in the context of the history of LA of the period. I got an email the other day from one of the editors at the LA Times, who I don't know very well, but he congratulated me on the book. He's finally got around to reading it, he said, and he said it's fantastic. It's just too bad that there isn't a lot written about this period of history, of LA's history, and that was music to my ears, because I wanted this as a history historian, so to speak. I wanted this to be as much a history of the period as it was a memoir for me. So the story you get in the book is, I take you to the room where things happened, some stories, some all of it documented, all of it very real and very accurate, but seen through my eyes, but also seeing the history of the period, why certain things happened. For example, how we got the Olympics for the 1984 Olympics. The bid for the 84 Olympics took place in 1978. That's when the city that's when the International Olympic Committee would make the decision on who would get the 84 games. There was only one other city that was competing for the games in 1978, and it was a city by the name of Tehran. They were preoccupied in 1978 with a revolution, and so we were the only bidder. And there weren't a lot of people who wanted to host the Olympic Games in 1978. Montreal had hosted it in 76 and went into debt for $500 million. And that's when $500 million was real money. In 72, we had the Munich fiasco with the murder of the 11 Israeli athletes and so forth. And 68 was Mexico City, which was another problem. Nobody wanted to host the Olympics, but Tom Bradley and half the city council and the business community wanted to host it in the worst way, and they were willing to sign away the city's treasury to do it, to sign an indemnification agreement with the IOC, assuming all liability for any financial overruns that may occur as a result of the games. So a bunch of us, led by my colleague, and most of you will not remember the name if any of you do, a councilman who served one term in the Northeast Valley, Sunland Tahunga area, by the name of Bob Ronka. Bob and I launched an effort to put a charter amendment. The charter is the document that governs the city. It's like our Constitution, and put a provision in the charter that would prevent the city from spending taxpayer money on the Olympic Games. Wanted the games. I wanted the games. I was, as I used to say, I was the only councilman who subscribed to track and field news. I was, as I said, I used to run track at Fairfax. And so it was a big deal for me, but I didn't want to spend the taxpayer money on it, because once you go down that slippery slope, it doesn't stop. And we got a lot of resistance from the establishment. And we threatened to go to an initiative to change the charter, to put an amendment to the charter. You have to get a vote of the people. It's like the state constitution. You can only amend it with a vote of the people. And we threatened to go to an initiative process to put it on the ballot if the city council and the mayor didn't negotiate with us over the language of an amendment. Now, what's the historical imperative of this period? 1978 was also the year that Proposition 13 was on the ballot in June of 1978. It passed overwhelmingly, the property tax reform measure that put a cap on property taxes. There was an uprising, a middle-class uprising, both among property owners, especially homeowners, and renters who were victimized by skyrocketing rents, as homeowners were victimized by skyrocketing property taxes. And so the mayor and some of the folks who were supporting the Olympics at any cost realized that if we did get an initiative on the ballot, it would pass. In June, this thing passed 65% to 35%. Almost 70% of LA County residents voted for it. This was ground zero for it. Sherman Oaks was ground zero for the Prop 13 revolution, actually. And so they negotiated with us, and we put a measure on the ballot in November of 78. Without going into all the detail, there's a whole chapter on it in the book. The International Olympic Committee knuckled under because they had no choice. Nobody else wanted to host the games, and we were the only game in town. As a result, the Olympic Games, the whole Olympic movement was saved, because what happened was we turned the Olympics into a private enterprise. We took it out of the government's hands, created an Olympic Committee. They hired Peter Uberoth, who nobody knew. He was a resident of Van Nuys, who had formed this very successful travel agency, national travel agency. And the privatized Olympic Committee ran like a business. And as a result, they made a lot of money. The cost of the Olympics was about $500 million. They made $750 million in revenue. They ended up with close to $250 million in net profit. A big chunk of it went to the Amateur Athletic Foundation, which continues to spin off funds for athletic programs all over the region. Hopefully this will happen again in the 2028 Olympics. Unfortunately, there is no charter amendment. That charter amendment only applied to the 1984 games. None of us could have dreamt that we would live long enough to see another Olympics come to LA, but here we are. But there is no protection in the charter against the city spending money on it, and I'm concerned about it. But I also have confidence in the leadership of the private Olympic Committee, and they should be able to pull it off without costing the taxpayers any money. And they should make a profit, because we do not have a lot of capital expenditure needs. I mean, most of the stadiums we already have. We have a Coliseum. We have the SoFi. Most of the stadiums we now have were not in existence in 1984. SoFi, Galen Center at USC, the soccer stadium in Exposition Park. It goes on and on. The only thing, Pauley Pavilion has been renovated. The only thing that still remains from the 32 games and the 84 games is the Coliseum itself, which will be the site of track and field. So I'm optimistic about that. So that's, but to talk about the Olympics, it's not just a sporting event, it's the political environment that took place. If it hadn't been for Proposition 13, I don't think we ever would have had an agreement with the mayor. But to his credit, he saw the writing on the wall, and then he led the charge. I want to give you another example, which is closer to home, to Valley Beth Shalom, the controversy over the Orange Line busway. I tell this story especially to Jewish audiences because it's the main opposition to the Orange Line came from Shaarei Tzedek congregation, which is the largest Orthodox congregation in the San Fernando Valley and one of the largest in California. And Rabbi Marvin Sugarman, who I knew as a constituent and a Talmudic scholar, a wonderful human being, I wouldn't argue with him on Talmud or Torah. He shouldn't have argued with me about transportation. We had a difference of opinion. The synagogue did not want the Orange Line built on Chandler Boulevard, even though that was the only place where it made sense. So I asked Rabbi Sugarman, I said, why do you oppose this so much? It's a busway. It used to be a freight train going down that right of way for decades. He says, Zev, half of my congregants live north of Chandler and half of them live south of Chandler. The synagogue is on the south side of Chandler. And if you put this busway up there, half the people, I'll lose my congregation. Half the people will quit. They'll go to someplace else, which I didn't buy it, but I wanted to give him a way out. I said, so here's what I propose to do. We'll put a traffic signal and a crosswalk right in front of your synagogue that crosses the Orange Line. And when the bus comes, if there's somebody who wants to cross, they push the button and it'll turn red for the bus. The bus will stop. People will be able to cross without any difficulty. He says, yes, but on Shabbos, they can't push the button because it activates electricity. And I said, we have an answer for that too. And it goes back to something that happened when I was first a city councilman here in the neighborhood in which I live, the Fairfax, Beverly and La Brea. In the mid-'70s, the city started putting up the walk, don't walk signs. There used to be in the old days, the flag signals, and then they took them down, but they put the walk, don't walk signals back in the mid-'70s. And in the Fairfax area where we have this area where I live is largely Orthodox. And half of them live east of La Brea and come from Hancock Park to the synagogues west of La Brea. And when they put the walk, don't walk signs, they couldn't cross the street without pushing the button. So of course, they wouldn't push the button to activate the walk sign. So they would cross against the don't walk sign. And then the police would stop them and give them a ticket for jaywalking. And in those days, I don't know if it's still the case, jaywalking was considered a moving violation. You had to sign the ticket as proof of service. Well, an Orthodox person can't write on Shabbos either. So they took him into the jail at the Wilshire Division Station. It was a mess. If it wasn't so serious, it would have been funny. And looking back at it, it is funny. So they called me, the rabbis called me, you got to do something about this. So I called my traffic engineer, the chief traffic engineer of the city, Sam Taylor, who's a Mormon. And I said, Sam, here's the problem. Is there a way to solve this? He says, yeah, it's very easy. All of these these walk, don't walk signs are computerized. We'll computerize it. We'll program it so that on Friday evening, it automatically turns green in a walk phase. And Saturday night, it'll go back to you have to activate it. And I said, you can do that? He says, yeah, not a problem. And I said, great. Only in Los Angeles could a Mormon traffic engineer solve a problem for an Orthodox community. So I told Rabbi Sugarman, oh, by the way, and Sam Taylor named the light, this program, he named it the Sabbatical Light after the Sabbath. So I told Rabbi Sugarman, I said, we've got a solution to the problem on Shabbos. I said, we'll put up the Sabbatical Light, telling him the story I just told you. And he couldn't take yes for an answer, right? So we went ahead and we did it. And fast forward to 2005 when we opened the Orange Line. Rabbi Sugarman had since retired and gone to Jerusalem. He came back for the high holidays, and I saw him at a banquet, and I said, "Rabbi, good to see you again." He says, "Good to see you, Zev." I said, "Hate to bring up a sore subject, but have you seen the Orange Line in operation?" Because it had just started to operate. He says, "Yes, yes, I've seen the Orange Line." I said, "So what do you think?" He says, "The Orange Line, what's not to like?" And I said to our chief operating officer for the construction project, I said, "We need to put a billboards all over the valley with a picture of Rabbi Sugarman that says, 'The Orange Line, what's not to like?'" We didn't do that, but it's a great story. The fact is, the Orange Line is the most successful busway in the United States. I don't know what the numbers are now. When I left office, it was carrying close to 40,000 people a day. It was estimated it would carry 15,000 people a day by the time I left, and it was hugely successful. Uh, Transportation is a big deal in this town, and we forget, those of us who are in public life forget that we build these things for people, not for contractors and not for developers who want to take advantage of this. I mean, they do take advantage, but the main reason we do it is for people. And I remember the one time when we opened the Orange Line, I was out there almost every day because this was my baby. I took a lot of political heat on it, and I was proud of it, that it worked the way I hoped it would work. And a woman came up to me and hugged me, gave me a kiss on my cheek. This is something I wasn't used to as a politician. And she thanked me. She said, "Thank you, thank." I said, "Why are you thanking me?" She says, I live in Van Nuys. I work in Long Beach." I'm sure she was a domestic worker. And in fact, I think she told me she was. It has taken me 2 hours and 15 minutes each way to get to and from work. That's 4.5 hours a day, 6 days a week. And now it's taken me an hour and a half. Saves me 45 minutes each way. And so it almost brought tears to my eyes because I realized we had basically restored to this person's life the equivalent of one working day that she could do with whatever she wants. She wasn't being held prisoner to a dysfunctional transportation system. That's why we build these things. It's not economical. I know there's a controversy in Sherman Oaks and in Bel Air about subway or no subway underneath the hills. Leaving all that aside, public transportation never makes money. That's why the government builds it and the private sector doesn't. So the reason we do it in the public sector is for the people and to give people an alternative to being stuck in traffic, or to have to spend 2 hours and 15 minutes getting to work when it could be an hour and a half or less. The Orange Line takes 42 minutes to go across the valley, and when they build the bridges over the major north-south streets, which is in the works, it'll be even less time. You know what it's like on the Ventura Freeway. You can sometimes get across the valley in 20 minutes. Sometimes it takes you an hour and a half. Depends on on a day like this. If there's an accident, if it's raining, it could take you an hour and a half to get from Woodland Hills to North Hollywood. On the Orange Line, it goes for 42 minutes. Last thing I want to do is just talk to you a little bit about my philosophy of government. And this again goes back to my history education. In the British Empire, my dad told me don't go into the British Empire history business because you'll never get a job, and he was probably right. But of course, I didn't listen to my dad. But I learned a lot from some British philosophers, and one of them was Thomas Macaulay, who was a historian. He served in the Parliament in Britain for a couple of years, and he had a line that became kind of my North Star. He said, "No man is fit to govern great societies who hesitates about disobliging the few who have access to him for the sake of the many he never sees." And that got my attention early in my career. And I can tell you that, especially when I became a county supervisor, where much of our work deals with the people who are on the margins of the economy, who are on the margins of society, who don't have health insurance, who may be incarcerated, who are maybe abused kids who become part of the foster care system. These are the people we never see, and we don't make eye contact with them. The homeless is another one, and so we need to be about the people we never see, and that guided me. And I was willing to take on powerful interests, whether they were unions or whether they were big business people. If they were not doing what I thought and what many of us thought was in the best interest of the general public, I would take them on. And 3 or 4 times, I launched initiative campaigns to pass legislation, whether it was stopping oil drilling by the beach, dealing with overdevelopment near our neighborhoods. I had one that dealt with the Metropolitan Transit Authority. I went over the heads of the politicians, my colleagues. It was the only way I could get their attention. It's the only way I could get something done. We have in California the initiative process. It applies to California as a state. It applies to the municipalities in the state. It was put in the state constitution 120 years ago, 110 years ago, for this exact purpose, that the people should have a safety valve to go over the heads of the state legislature, either to repeal something that they wanted repealed, or to enact something that the legislature refused to enact. Some of the major legislation in California was done by initiative. The Coastal Act, the Coastal Protection Act in California, was done by initiative. It never would have gotten through the state legislature. The Political Fair Practices Commission, that was done by initiative. The politicians never would have done it. So I was about the people we never saw, and whether it was janitors, many of whom were undocumented persons, who were working at night, all night, cleaning the toilets that we all use during the day. Many of their employers were people who were members of your congregation and my congregation. Many of the people were my supporters, and I went to them and I said, you've got to give them a fair wage. You've got to give them sick leave. You got to give them maternity leave. Well, we'll have to raise the rents by $1, $1 a square foot. I said, so what? These folks are making sub-minimum wage, and it's not livable, especially in Los Angeles. They won that battle, the Justice for Janitors campaign. I became one of their biggest supporters, because every night when I was in the office, and I was usually the last person to leave my office, both at the city and at the county, there was a woman, an older woman, Alma was her name, who was the janitor for our floor. She was a union person. She worked for the county. She had benefits. She had all this stuff. But I looked at her as she came in to clean up my office, and I realized that I was going home to my kids while she was coming to work, and they deserve to be treated with more. Those folks who do this work and work these graveyard shifts deserve to be given more respect. This goes back to the Macaulay quote about the many we never see. The last thing I'll say is about ethics, because this has been an issue, and I'm always asked about it. What about the corruption in government? And I will tell you that this is a problem. It's not new. The amount of money that's changing hands is new, but we've had corruption in this town for a long, long time, for 100 years or more. And of course, other cities have had even worse corruption problems. We had a mayor recalled in 1938. That's how we got Fletcher Bowron, who's the second longest serving mayor from 1938 to 53, who cleaned up City Hall to as large an extent as he could, given the forces that were working against him. But there are 2 things I want to say about corruption. Number one, we all as citizens, you all as citizens, have a role to play in this area. You can figure out, when you get mail from a candidate for office, you can look at who's paying for they have to disclose who's paying for that mailing. You can see who, if you look at that disclaimer, it's usually in small print, but you can do it, and you see who's paying for it, whether it's a union or whether it's the Apartment Association of California. You can tell who's backing these candidates, and you compare them to the other candidates, and you look, read the newspapers, be informed, go to community forums, because the people who are in office who become corrupt, we elected them. This wasn't some force from Mars that installed them. We elected them, and we have an obligation to be more informed about it. Is it perfect? No, but this is what democracy is all about. It's about individual citizens taking ownership of their citizenship. The second thing is something I tell my students at UCLA. If number one, taking a bribe is unethical and it's illegal. For me, it was never an issue. There are certain red lines. Every politician, everybody, every individual, no matter what their profession is, needs to look in the mirror. And I tell this to my students who are public policy students and going into that field. I say, look in the mirror and ask yourself the following question: what issue or issues am I willing to lose my job over? And for you, because if you can't answer that question, you're going to be subjected to the buffeting of special interests and stakeholders, and you got to know who you are. And so, of course, my students, they go to UCLA, the greatest public university in the country, according to U.S. News and World Report. They're smart kids. So they say, well, what was your red line, professor? Even though I'm not a professor, what was your red line? And I'll tell you what my red line was. First of all, was the Bill of Rights, because I'm sworn to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and that includes the Bill of Rights, and that includes the First Amendment of freedom of speech, even if I don't like the speech. It also involves separation of church and state, which I care deeply about. I took a lot of heat when we took the Christian cross off the county seal in 2004. You may remember that controversy. I got a lot of my co-religionists who said, "Why are you doing this? Still, you're making trouble for us." I said, "I'm sorry. It's unconstitutional, and we've been violating the Constitution for a long time, and we were being threatened with a lawsuit. And I was willing to lose my job over it. You can't believe what kind of mail I was getting, nationally. And my two colleagues, Supervisor Gloria Molina, who passed away last year, and the Supervisor Yvonne Burke, they took more heat than I did, because the evangelical world assumed that I was a perfidious Jew and I would not vote to keep the cross in the county seal. But when the two Christians voted to take the cross off the county seal, they felt that they were betraying their own kind. So they really took a lot more heat than I did. But that's the issue, among the issues that I feel very strongly about. And the other thing is ethics. And I warned my students. I said, listen, when somebody offers you a bribe and you accept it, you're breaking the law. The other thing you should know is that there are two people who know about the bribe: you and the guy who gave you the bribe. And maybe you can trust yourself to keep your mouth shut the rest of your life about the bribe. But how certain are you that the guy who gave you the bribe isn't going to blab about it to all of his friends and his colleagues, the partner in the office? And they do. And you're going to eventually it's going to catch up with you. And eventually it always does. And so if ethics doesn't move you, maybe self-interest would. And I think that shakes up my students. And I will tell you that I was offered cash 4 or 5 times in my career. All but one of them, well, I'm not going to characterize who they were, but they were our folks. They were our people. And every time I had to tell these guys, number one, you could go to jail for this. I could go to jail for this. I don't operate that way. Please take your envelope and put it back in your breast pocket. You've got to have that absolute red line that you just don't cross. It's a problem, and I will tell you, I'm informed, I'm knowledgeable about this stuff. I watch it very closely, and it bothers me that there is so much, and it's worse now than it ever was. The amount of money that goes into campaigns, forget what goes into somebody's pocket, but what goes into campaigns, the influence that has on public policy is very unhealthy. You've got to be able to, this is the third red line I have, you've got to be able to say no to your supporters if your supporters are out of line. That happened to me on rent control. I know rent control is a controversial issue. My district as a councilman was heavily renter oriented. Rents were going sky high. People were getting rent increases several times a year. They couldn't afford it. Most of them were elderly people. And it was a West Side and South San Fernando Valley issue at that time. And Joel Wax, who was my colleague, led the fight for rent control, and I was supporting him. And I was invited to a breakfast with several of the uh, developers who or apartment house owners who had supported me in my first campaign, and they knew they didn't think I was going to win, but they liked what I'd done for Soviet Jewry, et cetera. And they called me for a meeting, and they said, "We were there for you when you needed us. Now we need you." And my reaction to them was, "What makes you think when you supported me, you supported me because I was an independent and I was going to shake things up. What makes you think I'm going to knuckle under to this kind of pressure?" And all but one of those people I never spoke to again. You've got to be able to say no to your friends, to your supporters. If you can't do that, then you're nothing but you're prostituting yourself. And that's another place where you and I, as citizens, can have a voice. I think that's a major problem nationally, statewide, and certainly locally. And most of the people who are in public service are honest people, and they're in it for the right reasons. But it only takes a handful of people to paint everybody with the same broad brush, and they have to be weeded out. And you saw that in the most recent sentence of one of the council members, 13 years in federal prison for taking $1.5 million in cash. That's that will send a message to the folks in public office. All right, I've talked longer than I wanted to. We have about 5 minutes. If there are any questions, Joel.
Yeah. So Zev, I've got a question sort of
Yeah.
around the area of anti-Semitism. The word Yaroslavsky doesn't roll off the tongue. I mean, I think we're curious. What kind of anti-Semitism did you feel, not only growing up, but once you got into public service? What was your experience? And then there is a question that was submitted here, if you have time, is how are students and professors handling anti-Semitism at UCLA?
Yeah. Two good questions, and I'll try to be very brief. I have to say that I don't believe that I ever experienced anti-Semitism frontally. I can't tell you what people were saying behind my back. The only anti-Semitic moment that I can recall was really early in my campaign. There was a councilman who was a president of the city council. His name was John Gibson. He was a Bible thumper from San Pedro, and we were trying to get some zoning controls over development in the hillsides on the south side of Mulholland. And the developers were campaigning against us on this. And he spoke up and he attacked the opponents. He said, "All those people who live up in the hills," and he referenced them as Jews. I don't schrei Gewalt every time somebody says something stupid like that. I believe there's a difference between malicious anti-Semitism and cultural anti-Semitism. That guy was raised in Kansas. This is how he was raised. Walter Alston was the manager of the Dodgers. He and Sandy Koufax did not get along. He was I don't want to call him an anti-Semite. He was culturally challenged when it came to dealing with Jews. And those people are redeemable. You can educate them. The ones that you can't educate are the ones that wear white sheets, the ones that that traffic in Nazi literature and glorify them. I never had that experience. Now, I want to tell you, I left office on December 1st, 2014. It's different now. Anti-Semitism is very much part of the landscape now. My daughter-in-law, as many of you may know, is the councilwoman for the district I used to represent. And she spends most of her time on homelessness, in dealing with homeless encampments and doing a great job on it. And because it's the most Jewish district in Los Angeles, it's the west side of Los Angeles, there's been a lot of vandalism in the Pico Robertson area, attacks on rabbis and people going to shul in my neighborhood near Beverly and La Brea. It's a problem. And on campus, to answer that question, again, I don't want to, it's dangerous to exaggerate it. but it's a problem. And Jewish students on campus are feeling, first of all, it's intimidating to have a bunch of people marching across the campus, which they have a right to do. And I always defend their right to do it, even though I disagree with everything they stand for. But they have a right to walk around the campus saying from the river to the sea, and we can't stop it. They have constitutional right to do that. And if we try to fight them and then lose in court, it gives them even more credibility. We need to be strategic about that sort of thing. But the bigger problem is the faculty. And when a student goes to class and a professor gives a talk about, the neo-colonial settlers, and they're not referring to West Bank settlers, they're referring to every Jew in Israel. And they do not believe Israel has a right to exist. And they talk like that. Professors talk. When a professor talks, he's the master. The students are the slaves. You don't want to alienate your professor, because at the end of the day, he or she determines what your grade's going to be. So I see that myself. People want to tell me what I want to hear. And I tell them, don't write your paper thinking you're telling me what I want to hear. I don't care if it's something I don't want to hear. Just back it up, use your mind, have your sources, and don't try to make me happy. But most students don't believe that. And I get it. I was a student once too. I never took on my professor. But when a Jewish student raises her hand and tries to challenge a professor who says something about neocolonialism, that Zionism is nothing but a European neocolonialist experiment, and then gets shot down by that professor, that's a very unsettling moment for that student, and it creates insecurity that goes well beyond the classroom. I've talked to the chancellor about it. He's very well aware of it. I work with the chancellor on Israel-Palestine issues on campus. It's very difficult, and it's not just on campuses. And by the way, I think UCLA is a better environment than some of the East Coast places. That doesn't mean it's a good environment. Campuses generally are not good environments for Jews these days, and I will tell you that it's not good. And I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about it more broadly beyond the campuses. I'm just concerned about anti-Semitism. It's been unleashed. It was always under the surface, and it was not socially acceptable to be a bigot. When it comes to Jews and it comes to Zionism, and I do believe that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. I don't think it's even up. If there was ever a debate to be had about it, it's certainly after October 7th. I think we know that being anti-Zionism is being anti-Israel, and Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people. So when you attack Zionism, the ideological underpinning of the national homeland of the Jewish people, you're attacking Jewish people. And nobody has a right to tell me how I feel when somebody calls me a Zionist in a pejorative way. I'm a Jew. Most Jews believe that Israel's the national homeland of the Jewish people. They may not agree with Bibi, and I don't, and I think he needs to go. I'll be very blunt about that. But forget the politics. The country, this goes back to my maternal grandfather. He's turning in his grave with some of the politics in Israel, but Israel is still our homeland. And when somebody attacks the ideological underpinning of our homeland, at least I'll speak for myself, and I think I speak for a lot of Jews. That is the most anti-Jewish sort of thing that I've experienced in all of my life. I never had this in grade school, which wasn't all Jewish. Fairfax was mostly all Jewish. I never experienced it at UCLA. I had Malcolm Kerr, who was a professor of political science, became the president of Beirut's American University, and was assassinated by Palestinian terrorists. He was a pro-Arab guy or an even-handed guy, never wore it on his sleeve in the classroom. He was a first-rate professor. I took a class from him. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, an Israeli, got his PhD at UCLA. Malcolm Kerr was on his doctoral committee. That doesn't happen anymore. The even-handedness, the let's hear both sides doesn't happen so much on the campus as it used to, and that's a problem. And Yeah, and I think good professors need to. It's hard for professors to be even-handed these days on campuses. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. It's not
Yes.
as bad as you think it is, but it's not as good as some people would like to make it sound.
So Zev, we've used up our hour.
All right, I
But
appreciate it.
on behalf of our Hazak program, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to meet with us, share your story. It's inspirational. And again, thank you so much for meeting with us.
I appreciate it, and thank you for the invitation, and thanks for arranging so I didn't have to float through Laurel Canyon today. And if you're interested in the book, go on Amazon, Zev's Los Angeles. It's a great read. You'll enjoy it, and a lot of things in there that you'll recognize. Thank you very much, and have a good week, everybody.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.